like to introduce you to what I would call a phenomenal man, David Gluckman. You mightn't know his name, but I can assure you, you know some of the brands he's created. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you, Lee.
Could you tell us a little bit about your history, David?
Well, I was born and raised and educated in South Africa. I became disillusioned with the politics, so left at the end of 1961 and came to England. I was originally in advertising, but as an executive, and I wanted to do something more creative. So in 1969, I became a product developer, which I've done ever since. And I have a very long, strong association with Ireland.
Very good. Tell us about some of the types of brands you've worked on over the years and helped develop.
Well, probably the most significant early brand I worked at when I was in advertising was the development of Kerrygold as a branded butter. That's working with Tony O'Reilly, who was a brilliant client and a great inspirational person to work with. In the agency, we turned Kerrygold from an anonymous commodity, Irish butter, from an anonymous commodity into a brand, Kerrygold. And I think it was one of the most successful developments in the 1960s. I was a minor functionary in this team, but it was very exciting to be working with a guy like O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Very inspirational.
And now, obviously, you've been in the game a lot of years, and I know, obviously, from some of the conversations we've had and from reading your book, that obviously you went on to really what some would call phenomenal success. Can you tell me about some of the brands you developed as and when you got on your own 2 feet?
Well, I set up in business with a partner in 1973, and the first brief we had was from an Irish company. We'd never met the principals of the company, but the brief came down from the Minister of Economic Affairs, in which what they did was offered a 10-year tax holiday to any brands that were primarily for export. So we were given this incredibly vague brief, which was to develop an Irish alcoholic beverage brand for export. There were no constraints, no parameters. It was just an utterly open brief. And one very cold April morning, we created Baileys in about 45 minutes.
Oh, very good.
It started with my saying to my partner, is there anything in my Kerrygold experience which will have bearing on this brief? And he said, well, what happens if you mix cream and Irish whiskey? So we went down to the local supermarket, bought some cream, bought some Irish whiskey, and had a prototype for what became the Baileys brand in about 3/4 of an hour. Most of the time was taken going up and down the stairs to the supermarket. And on that day in 1973, we created the prototype for Baileys. We had no idea whether it was feasible or not, but we took it over to the company, who took it to their R&D people, who looked at it quizzically, and then got on with producing a prototype.
Very good.
So that was my first experience of working on an Irish brand. And we presented
What year was that again, David?
Sorry?
What year was that?
That was 1973. I think the date was actually April the 2nd, 1973. We just started a very small business, my partner and I, and that was our first brief, and probably our most successful.
Very good. And there's other brands you've worked with over the years. Would you like to mention any of those?
Yeah, sure. 10 years after Baileys, by which time the company had become a kind of marketing academy in Ireland.
Yeah.
We were summoned to Dublin to get a brief on a coffee cream liqueur, because the coffee shop, the famous coffee shop Bewley's, had launched a coffee cream liqueur, and Baileys wanted to riposte quickly. So we were given the brief, and the brand that came out of that was called Sheridan's, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. So that was another cream liqueur venture that I was engaged in. And then in 2007, when I'd stopped working for Diageo and was a free agent, I got together with two partners and produced what I think is the world's best cream liqueur. It's called Coole Swan.
Very good.
It's made in Ireland. It's made with single malt whiskey, the best cream. It's made with Belgian white chocolate. And if anyone out there who's listening to this has not heard of it, I urge you to go and try it. It's a fantastic product.
Very good.
I also did some work on various Guinness projects as well. So I've got a very long and well-established association with the Emerald Island.
And on the night, David, obviously, that's why I asked you the date, 1973. Obviously, we're in 2020 now, and you've still got your hand in the game. You're on your second book. I think you're a phenomenal guy. I've really enjoyed our chats. Obviously, the event on the 27th at the Ellison in Castle Bar I've called the event Legacy, and it's because of two of the main speakers there. One would be yourself, and the other would be another good friend of mine, Bill Phillips, because you guys have been what you do for a number of years, and the stuff you know isn't really in books, not unless you've written them. So on the night, what wisdom do you think you'll be able to pass down to us youngsters?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about my experience over the years was that I worked as a consultant to what became Diageo, the biggest drinks company in the world. I worked as an outside consultant for them for 36 years. And what I'd like to do is pass on some of the lessons that I learned, because we operated like a small startup in a great global giant corporation. People really saw us. We spent very little. We operated quickly. We reported invariably to top management. We didn't go through the marketing process of having to look at lots of options. So I'm going to give people some indication as to what works and what doesn't. And I hope it's useful.
Over the years, I would imagine, like, obviously some of the ideas you've come up with that are successes now, people around you that you communicate to would have had their doubts and your own insecurities. How did you get over those? How did you know that this was the idea? How did you know that this was the right way to go?
Well, you never know there's no such thing as a perfect answer. I mean, I think even Bailey, successful as it's been, might not have been a perfect solution to anything, but so you have to keep going. I think one of the things I've recognized over the years is that the real heroes of ideas are not the people who have them. It's very nice to think, if you come up with a good idea, that you're a genius. I think it's the people who buy ideas. I think that's very important, and I think it's a real skill. And I think it's something that we should perhaps try to teach and try to identify. I've met some people who within 30 seconds, I could explain an idea to them and they'd immediately see it and immediately take it on. And I think that's very attractive. But I've had ideas that I've really liked that never got off the drawing board. And it's very sad. Sometimes you can't persuade people.
Obviously, I do a bit of idea creation myself sometimes, and I've had those moments in the car or moments in the shower where you think, eureka, and then the next day the idea seems to have gone by the way. Have you ever had moments like that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that often the overnight test is a good test of whether ideas are any good or not. You know, you have it one day and then you think about it all day and you think how clever you are for the whole day, and then the next morning you wake up and you say, no, it's not particularly good. But I mean, I was looking back over my book, there are quite a few ideas that didn't succeed,
Yeah.
Or weren't taken up by people. But looking at them even now, 20 years on, I still think they were good ideas. I mean, one of those was distilled Guinness.
Yeah.
I look at that now and I still think it was a great idea. And I cannot understand why nobody's taken it up. But there you go.
I'm going to ask you a question, David, and it's meant with the greatest of respect, but it could be heard in the negative. I can assure you it's not meant in the negative. You're 81 years old. Where do you get your passion and inspiration from?
I think it's the business. It's the fact that I'm continually looking for another idea. You know, I'm challenged now. I've got to think of a 20-minute speech to do at your conference, and that's a challenge. It's got to be the best thing that I can possibly do. So it's this constant desire to have ideas. And the other thing, which has been a very attractive outcome of my book, is that I have been contacted by maybe 36 people since my book's been out. They've all been young startups, many of them in the drinks business, and they've all found my book an excitement, and they've been very enthusiastic about what's in it. It's the no-nonsense approach to developing ideas, and many of them regard it as a useful piece of mentorship. So meeting people, it's meeting new people all the time is very stimulating for me.
Very good. And like, obviously you've been down the trail so far, probably so far in front of other people that you probably don't see it. I know you're very humble, but for many of the people who's either looking to develop ideas or to sort of develop that whether it be a product or business, there can be a lot of challenges along the journey, which I'm sure you're aware of. The bit I find very, I don't know the word for it, honourable about you is there's no ego with you at all. How do you keep yourself in that place where you just seem sincere and everything you say is just said in a conversation? How do you, have you always been like that?
I don't. That's an embarrassing and difficult question to answer. I think I've been kept honest by this realization that an idea is only as good as the other person across the table says. So, in other words, we come to Bailey's with no plan B, and had David Dand and his team back in 1973 said that's not going to work. It was no longer a good idea. So it's your dependence on other people.
Yeah,
I suppose keeps you honest, and I hope I've stayed that way.
And how do you not let that affect you emotionally? Because some people would imagine are sort of very internally invested in the idea. How do you take the knocks in life?
How do I
take the knocks?
You don't accept them. I never accepted an idea that I've bust a gut to produce isn't good, and I'll go away and say, well, it was a good idea anyway, and it's a pity it didn't work. There you go.
Yeah, because that's the bit. That's why I asked you the question about having that honor, that sort of sincerity, integrity you have about you. Because in my own head, you sort of think, what would he be like if they said no to an idea? Would he still be that balanced? Would he still be that charismatic, really? Or would he be defensive? And you don't come across as defensive at all.
Well, I don't think I haven't had too many rejections of ideas. I mean, I've had a couple, but I wrote a couple of pieces on LinkedIn recently. One was I've just noticed that there's a vodka called Tito's, which has become the biggest selling vodka in America, the biggest selling spirit brand in America. And its story is that it's so smooth it can be drunk straight. Now, I developed an idea like that for Smirnoff in 1990.
Yeah.
It was called Smirnoff Black. And I don't think the company was as committed to that idea as Mr. Tito has been to his vodka.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it's sad. I mean, when you develop ideas, you pass them on to a company, and what happens to them afterwards is entirely up to them. You know, you have no influence or involvement thereafter.
And how do you sort of, I suppose, let your ideas out of the nest? Can you let them go, or?
Well, you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's an idea produced for another company, for a client company, it becomes their idea. And I remember when we did Bailey's, we originally called it a Irish chocolate cream liqueur. And no sooner had it got to Bailey's, but they took the word chocolate off. Now, they probably did the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, they certainly did the right thing as far as they were concerned. But they took a piece off it, if you like. They clipped an ear off the brand because they thought it made sense. And I think it probably did.
And in your own wisdom, David, like obviously in your circumstances, you created ideas and sort of passed them on. What wisdom do you think you could pass on to somebody that's invested in the idea and actually is the developer and the producer and literally takes it into the marketplace? And do you think there's any wisdom you could pass on to them that would shorten their journey?
Well, I have no real record. I think my particular skill is coming up with ideas and turning those ideas into brands.
Yeah.
I think my abilities when it comes to making those brands happen are pretty limited.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on what happens in the marketplace.
Gotcha.
But I'm good at delivering a brand. So anything that I was to pass on to other people would focus largely on how to create the brand.
I know you've got a book out, and can you tell us a little bit about that and where people can get it?
The book is the story of my business life, and its title is a bit controversial. It's called That Shit Will Never Sell. That Shit Will Never Sell. And the name, the title came from a quote by an American pundit in the drinks business when he first saw Bailey's. He looked at the bottle, said the green livery looked a bit like Vietnam fatigues.
Yeah.
He then tasted the product, looked up and said, "That shit will never sell." And I thought, what a good title for a book. Nobody will forget it. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it on www.thatshitwillneversell.com, which is our website. It's worth having a look anyway, just to see the Bailey story is in there.
And just for those listening, you do different talks and consultancy, am I correct?
I do. If anybody wants me, I'm available.
That's perfect. At the same website, yes?
Yep.
That's perfect. Thank you for your time, David.